Trump slammed the table on live TV. She didn't flinch. Jasmine Crockett challenged the president face-to-face, and the fallout exposed far more than anyone expected. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than another televised panel, a roundtable on ethics reform, aired live from the Capitol's secondary chamber, moderated by a rotating team of journalists from 3 major networks. The kind of segment that gets cut into sound bites for the evening news and quickly forgotten. But on that humid Thursday in D.C., something raw and unforgettable happened. Millions were watching, but no one expected Jasmine Crockett to ignite the entire conversation with a single sentence. She had waited patiently through 2 long-winded openings. When her turn came, she didn't adjust her mic, didn't clear her throat, didn't soften her tone. She looked directly at the president, who sat across from her, flanked by advisors and 2 senators trying not to blink. "Mr. President," she began, "your language about urban districts isn't just careless. It's dangerous. These aren't just talking points you're tossing out to stir a base. People in my district are watching their neighborhoods change, not from policy, but from fear." There was a stillness in the room, one of those moments where even the tech staff stopped scrolling on their phones. Trump leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. Crockett continued, slowly and clearly, "Every time you say our elections are full of fraud, you're not just attacking a system. You're attacking voters like mine, working-class people who don't look like you, who don't live like you, and who are tired of being treated like background noise." The words hung in the air for a second too long. Then came the response, not from a press secretary, not from a senator sitting nearby, but from the president himself. "You don't talk to me like that," Trump barked, his voice sharp and rising as he leaned forward and slammed his hand against the oak table. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The moderator flinched. Cameras caught the moment from 3 angles. But Crockett didn't retreat. She didn't even blink. "Mr. President, with all due respect," she said with an even voice that seemed to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, "the truth doesn't require your permission." It was as if time slowed for a second. No shouting, no scrambling, just silence. Then the room shifted, eyes darted toward Trump, who now sat tight-lipped, glaring. The producers cut to a wide shot, but it was too late. The moment had already hit social media. Within minutes, clips began flooding Twitter, then Instagram, then TikTok. The clip was short, 20 seconds, but potent. People were reposting it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. A member of Congress had spoken directly to the president, corrected him on live television, and didn't fold under pressure. Later that evening, political analyst Mark Schell said on MSNBC, "You could see it in her body language. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't just speaking to the room. She was speaking to millions of people who've been waiting for someone to say it." The White House issued a vague statement blaming media framing and claiming the president responded appropriately to a mischaracterization. But the damage was already done. In fact, it wasn't damage at all. For Crockett, it was the opposite. Overnight, her Instagram followers doubled. Her district office in Dallas reported more than 700 emails in less than 6 hours, most thanking her. She was trending in 4 states. On Capitol Hill, the atmosphere was different the next morning. Some lawmakers averted eye contact. Others pulled her aside to say, "Thank you." A few simply said, "You were right." But the biggest surprise wasn't in D.C. It was what started happening all over the country the very next day. By sunrise, cable news was already in motion. CNN ran the headline, "Jasmine Crockett confronts Trump head-on." Fox's banner read, "Congresswoman disrespects president in live ethics panel." The lines had been drawn, and the country, already restless from a week of political drama, leaned in closer. In Fresno, California, a retired teacher named Linda Mendes made her morning coffee with the clip playing on loop in her kitchen. "She said what I've been thinking for years," she told her daughter on the phone. Across the country in Tallahassee, Marcus Bell, a delivery driver on his first break of the day, played the clip for his coworkers on his phone. "Yo, that lady ain't scared of nothing," someone said. Everyone nodded. The reaction wasn't just emotional, it was seismic. On one side, people saw Crockett's words as a breath of fresh air in a room gone stale. On the other, some believed she'd crossed a line by speaking to the president so directly. Calls flooded talk radio. Online comment sections exploded. Panelists on morning shows couldn't agree, was this bravery or disrespect? While the internet raged, Crockett showed up to work like nothing had happened. Outside the Capitol, a few dozen reporters waited, hoping for a soundbite. She gave them one. "I said what I said," she told them. "My job isn't to flatter power. It's to speak truth for the people who put me here, especially when that truth makes people uncomfortable." By lunchtime, her sentence was printed on shirts being sold by a local vendor in Dallas. Her office tried to shut it down, but they couldn't keep up. The phrase had caught fire. But not everyone was clapping. An hour after the footage hit its peak online, a conservative PAC released a heavily edited version of the exchange, removing Crockett's measured tone and framing it as a meltdown. "Radical left Congresswoman lashes out at President," the caption read. The comments section was worse, calling her disrespectful, out of control, an embarrassment to Congress. The online attacks escalated quickly. Her personal email was leaked. Threats followed. Her staff went on lockdown. Security at her district office in Texas was increased. Some members of Congress began privately whispering about whether she had put herself in political danger. A few suggested she issue a soft apology to calm things down. She didn't. Instead, Crockett went on Good Morning America 2 days later and doubled down. "I'm not interested in tiptoeing around truth just because it makes some people uncomfortable," she said, seated next to host Sarah Owens. "If this country wants ethics reform, it needs to start with honest conversations, even when they're hard to hear." It was clear by then that Crockett wasn't backing off, and the public wasn't letting go either. In a high school classroom in Dayton, Ohio, a civics teacher named Robin Galen played the full clip for her 10th grade students. After the video, one student asked, "Why doesn't anybody else talk to the president like that?" Robin didn't have a clear answer. It wasn't just classrooms and coffee shops. By Sunday, churches, barbershops, town halls, and book clubs were all talking about the moment. Some called it disrespect. Others called it real leadership. In certain circles, it sparked something more, a question that had been bubbling just under the surface: what does accountability actually look like when you speak truth to power, especially as a black woman in a system built to silence you? Political scientists, commentators, and even a few late-night comedians jumped in. Stephen Colbert joked, "Crockett hit Trump with the one-liner of the decade, 'The truth doesn't require your permission.' That's not a mic drop. That's a mic obliteration." But one moment stood out above all the chatter. It happened during a Sunday town hall event in a small amphitheater in Tacoma, Washington. Crockett had flown in at the request of a grassroots voting group. After the Q&A, an older woman named Evelyn stood up, clutching a cane in one hand and the mic in the other. "I watched you speak to that man like he was your equal, not your boss, not your fear, your equal. That's the first time I've seen something like that in my lifetime." Crockett swallowed hard, blinked twice, and said only, "Thank you." But while the applause grew louder in some parts of the country, behind the scenes in Washington, pressure was mounting, and not in her favor. In the West Wing, the mood was foul, not chaotic, just tight, the kind of tension that doesn't show in headlines but leaks into hallway glances and fast-moving memos. By Friday afternoon, staffers were no longer pretending the clip hadn't gone viral. Senior advisors were already on their third round of calls with cable news producers, trying to spin the outburst as passion, presidential firmness, or, as one aide put it in an off-the-record text, just Trump being Trump. But this time felt different. It wasn't just that he lost his cool. It was how composed she had stayed, and worse, the way people were reacting to it. At 4:22 p.m. in the Roosevelt Room, a meeting was called. Communications Director Dylan Rhee, Press Secretary Amanda Ridge, Chief of Staff Barry Lang, and 3 members of the legal team sat across from each other in a quiet panic. "We need a pivot," Amanda said, eyes locked on her tablet. "People think he got rattled. The longer we ignore it, the more that becomes the story." Barry sighed. "She got under his skin. That's it. It happens." "No," Dylan snapped. "It doesn't just happen. It landed. People see him lose his temper every week, but this time he looked threatened." No one answered, but they didn't need to. Across the hall, Trump was pacing in the Oval Office, refusing to take phone calls from party leaders who wanted him to just move on. He was already furious that Crockett's name was being mentioned in the same breath as potential 2028 candidates on MSNBC. Worse yet, a recent push poll showed her approval among independents had jumped by 13 points in less than 48 hours. "She's nobody," he shouted at an aide. "Nobody. Nobody watches those districts. You hear me?" The aide didn't answer. Trump grabbed the remote and turned to OAN, hoping for coverage that made him look stronger. But even their tone was cautious. The words, composure, and poise, were being used about her. Downstairs in the White House press bullpen, Amanda Ridge was rewriting the talking points for the evening's press briefing. "We're saying the president stands firm in the face of unfair attacks," she told her assistant, tapping her screen. "Don't mention Crockett by name. Keep the focus on ethics. We won't give her any more oxygen." But the damage control wasn't working. By Saturday morning, a leak surfaced, audio from the very room where the president had exploded. Someone in the sound crew had caught the full exchange, including the seconds after the camera feed had cut. The audio revealed Trump cursing under his breath, grumbling about uppity showboating and media stunts, phrases that critics immediately called racially loaded. Once again, Crockett didn't respond directly, but her staff quietly confirmed that she had heard the leak, and her silence spoke louder than any tweet. Meanwhile, inside the Republican National Committee, concerns grew louder. A few longtime strategists called it a messaging disaster. Some quietly suggested that Trump's obsession with the exchange was keeping him off message at a time when he needed discipline heading into the next legislative session. In Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, field organizers started fielding unusual questions at town halls. Is she going to run for something bigger? Back at the White House, Trump called a special briefing with a few media allies. He wanted a piece published, an op-ed or interview that would remind people who's boss. But when asked if he wanted to address the incident head-on, he snarled, "I don't give her that. She doesn't get that. She wants attention. She can bark on TikTok." The room fell silent. Amanda Ridge quietly sent a text under the table to her deputy, "This could spiral." That night, while most of D.C. slept, Jasmine Crockett was back in her apartment on the southeast side, going over notes for a speech she'd been invited to give at a university in St. Paul. Her phone buzzed with another security alert, an anonymous threat flagged by Capitol Police. She paused for a moment, looked at the screen, then turned it face down. She called her mother. "They're going to keep coming for me now," Jasmine said quietly. Her mother didn't pause. "So, let them come. If they're coming, it means you're doing something right." But even as her confidence held steady, there were real-world consequences on the way, ones that couldn't be handled with grace alone. Long before she ever sat across from a president or had her name trending in headlines, Jasmine Crockett was just a kid growing up in Mesquite, Texas. Her father worked nights as a bus mechanic. Her mother, a registered nurse, kept the house warm, fed, and organized like it was a command center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was full of grit. Her first public speaking moment wasn't in Congress. It was at the Mount Olive Baptist Church at age 9, when she recited a poem during Youth Day. Her voice shook. She mispronounced perseverance. But she held her head high and kept going. That stuck with her. She didn't plan to go into politics. Law was the goal. And even that came after an incident during her freshman year at Prairie View A&M. A professor dismissed a question she asked in class, flatly, rudely, like her voice didn't matter. That night, she sat in her dorm room with a textbook open but unread. Her roommate, Denise, looked up from her bunk and said, "You going to let him shut you up?" "No," Jasmine answered. "I'm just figuring out how to make people like that hear me." She graduated in the top third of her class and went on to law school in Dallas. While her peers chased clerkships and corporate internships, Jasmine signed up for a volunteer role defending tenants being evicted without cause. Some nights, she showed up to court in second-hand suits and heels that pinched. Her car barely started in the mornings. She kept going anyway. By her early 30s, she'd become a known name in North Texas legal circles. Not flashy, just reliable, someone who'd walk into a courtroom with a legal pad, a purpose, and no interest in playing nice if justice wasn't being served. Then came the turning point. An old client, Arturo Bonitez, called her in a panic. His 19-year-old nephew had been arrested during a protest and charged with resisting arrest, though cell phone footage told a different story. Jasmine took the case pro bono. It didn't just get tossed, it sparked a quiet movement in her community. By the time she ran for state legislature, she'd already built a reputation that couldn't be reduced to soundbites. She wasn't polished, but she was focused. Her speeches didn't use lofty metaphors. She spoke in plain language, quoting statistics and then telling the story behind the numbers. At town halls, she let people talk longer than the rules allowed. Her staff hated that. She didn't care. When she won her congressional seat, some thought she'd soften her tone to fit in. Instead, she did the opposite. She brought that same blunt energy into every committee hearing and policy meeting. But behind the scenes, she was learning, watching, calculating. She didn't speak often in major televised events, not because she was afraid, but because she was waiting for the right moment, the moment when what she said wouldn't just be heard, it would land. That moment came at the round table. Her staff knew something was up that morning. She'd barely spoken during the car ride. In the green room, she refused coffee, just sat with her elbows on her knees, scrolling through neighborhood crime stats from her district. When she looked up, she said, "They're not going to like what I'm about to say. But they need to hear it." They did. What made her response so potent wasn't just the words. It was the years behind them, the courtroom days, the town halls, the files she kept in her closet labeled with handwritten tabs, evictions, custody battles, ICE raids. She had lived the fight she was now confronting on national TV. Even her closest allies in Congress didn't fully expect it. Representative Colin Wexler, who'd worked alongside her on voting rights legislation, said later in an interview, "She doesn't waste a breath. Jasmine's the kind of person who speaks when she has something to say, and when she does, you better believe it's coming from a real place." But all of that, her upbringing, her legal career, her patient build-up to that exact moment, was now being reduced by her critics to attitude and aggression. They didn't see the years. They only saw the clip. But the people who knew her best saw something else, a storm that had been building quietly for years, now finally being heard across the nation. In Dallas's District 30, it wasn't some abstract policy debate. It was real and raw, streets cracked from years of neglect, public buses that didn't show up on time, grocery stores shutting down, leaving whole blocks with nothing but liquor stores and dollar marts. And now, rising fears about voter suppression, rumors of purged rolls, and precincts moved without warning. That's what Jasmine Crockett was talking about when she confronted the president, not just theory, not just soundbites, but real-life consequences, right where she came from. 2 days after the roundtable, Crockett returned home for a scheduled visit. She didn't take the private entrance. She walked straight through the main terminal at Dallas Love Field. Several people recognized her. A security guard approached and whispered, "You shook him," then grinned. "I don't think he's used to that." Outside her district office in Oak Cliff, a small crowd had already gathered, some reporters, some residents. One woman held a sign that read, "Truth don't ask permission." A teenage boy wearing a wrinkled button-up shirt walked up and asked if she was hiring interns. She told him to bring his resume Monday. Inside, the phones rang non-stop. "We've had calls from Long Beach, from Ohio, even some from Alaska," her district manager said, rubbing his eyes. "But it's the local stuff that's starting to hit." He handed her a list. A voter registration office in Wilmer suddenly cut Saturday hours, a bus line serving 3 low-income neighborhoods stopped running after 7 p.m., 2 polling locations announced closures for budget reasons. Jasmine looked at the paper, then up at her staff. "I want to see every one of these locations in person." So that's what she did. In an unmarked car with tinted windows and no press trailing behind, she visited the Wilmer office first. The woman working the desk looked nervous when she walked in. "I didn't even know you were coming," she said, clutching a clipboard. "That's kind of the point," Jasmine replied. Outside, a man named Calvin flagged her down, late 50s, wearing a Vietnam vet cap, sun-worn face. "I don't do politics," he said. "But what you said, that was real. They treat us like we're stupid. They count on it." Jasmine answered, "And they hope you stay quiet." He smiled. "Not anymore." At the next stop, a shuttered polling site that used to be a middle school, she stood at the chain-link fence for a long while. Budget reasons, was the official story. But inside the building, lights still worked. Custodians were still on rotation. So why was voting off the table? That question lingered in her mind. She went to a local barbershop afterward, an old no-frills place called Kenny's Spot. No campaign flyers, no big show, just conversation. An older man getting a cut said, "They move the polls like we don't notice, and then they act like turnout's our fault." "They want us tired," Jasmine said. "Nah," the barber chimed in. "They want us invisible." Jasmine took a breath. "Well, I've been told I'm a little too visible lately." Everyone laughed, but then the room got quiet. One guy, maybe in his late 20s, said, "Keep being visible." "My sister cried when she saw that video. Said you made her feel like she mattered." The silence after that was heavier than applause. She stayed for another hour, just listening. That's what she'd always done best: listen, ask questions, and pay attention to what wasn't being said. But back at the office that evening, the mood shifted again. A thick envelope had arrived from Capitol Security, containing updated safety protocols, a list of flagged threats, and a memo advising her to avoid large gatherings without police presence. Her chief of staff looked at her. "We might need to slow down." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She flipped through the memo, then looked up. "They want us scared." "Yeah," her staffer said, "because scared people sit down." Jasmine folded the paper and slid it into a drawer. Not today. But while the ground support was growing at home, so were the whispers in D.C., and they were getting sharper by the hour. The internet didn't just react, it erupted. What started as a 20-second clip replayed from a dozen angles became something far more potent, a symbol. By Saturday night, Twitter had transformed into a battlefield. On one end, thousands of users, teachers, nurses, organizers, even celebrities, amplified the moment under the tag hashtag Jasmine held the line. On the other, an equal force tried to drown it out with terms like race baiter, loudmouth, and attention seeker. The hate came fast. So did the love. But Crockett didn't post a word. That silence only made things louder. On TikTok, Gen Z creators broke the clip down frame by frame. One creator from Phoenix pointed to the exact second Crockett chose to pause and let the president interrupt himself. "That's strategy," she said in her video, "not emotion. That's how you take control of a conversation without raising your voice." Another video showed her response, "The truth doesn't require your permission," replayed over footage of famous historic speeches. The comments were full of fire emojis and praise, but also questions like, why don't more politicians talk like this? By the next morning, several artists had uploaded their own tributes, paintings, digital collages. One even turned her quote into a spoken-word piece layered over jazz. Crockett, meanwhile, remained focused on her district visits and behind-the-scenes calls. When asked by a reporter why she wasn't engaging online, she said simply, because this isn't about trending. It's about telling the truth. Still, the online momentum didn't slow. It got personal. Influencers started telling their own stories, tying Crockett's words to moments in their lives when they were told to stay quiet, stay polite, stay grateful. One woman in New Mexico said, "I've worked in hospitals for 15 years, and I've never seen someone shut down a man like that without raising her voice. That's not just political. That's cultural." Of course, not all the attention was supportive. A coordinated smear campaign began surfacing by Sunday afternoon. Right-wing media outlets resurfaced old courtroom footage, spliced and edited to make Crockett look erratic or combative. One video, titled "The Real Jasmine Crockett," tried to paint her as hostile toward law enforcement, ignoring the fact she'd spent most of her legal career defending the rights of working-class families. Her office issued no official statement. But something strange happened. The more her critics tried to discredit her, the stronger the online support became. People weren't falling for the edits. They knew what they saw on live TV, and they were sticking to it. Even late-night hosts joined the conversation. On The Daily View, host Laura Meta quipped, "Imagine being so shaken by a woman speaking truthfully that you punch a table on live TV. Sir, calm down. It's not a Marvel villain. It's a congresswoman." The laughter helped, but the tension kept simmering. In a podcast episode that dropped Monday morning, political strategist Jay Crenshaw said, "What we're seeing isn't just a media moment. This is a cultural crack, a shift. People are tired of polished lies." Crockett wasn't trying to go viral. That's why it happened. Back in D.C., Crockett's aides tracked the numbers in silence. Engagement was through the roof. Followers were up by hundreds of thousands. Mentions in major outlets had tripled, and donations, overnight, she pulled in more small-dollar contributions than she had in any previous quarter. She hadn't even asked for them. But it wasn't just Crockett the public was watching. It was the system's reaction to her. When the media storm died down, they wondered, what would happen next? Because sometimes going viral can be a blessing, but other times it paints a target. In an early morning meeting, her communications director leaned in. "We're going to have to pick a side, either ride this wave or pull back." Jasmine sipped her tea slowly. "I didn't start a wave. I answered a question." "And what if they hit back harder?" her aide asked. "Then they'll learn I don't scare easy," she replied. But while the internet rallied, some of her opponents weren't just tweeting. They were planning their next move, and it wouldn't come through a screen. By Tuesday morning, the knives were out, not the kind you see on cable news, but quieter, sharper, passed around in closed-door meetings and committee whispers, the kind of knives that cut careers, not headlines. Inside the Capitol, Republican leadership had already drafted a preliminary ethics complaint. It accused Jasmine Crockett of conduct unbecoming a member of Congress, citing her disrespectful tone toward the President of the United States. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. They wanted to send a message. By noon, 3 GOP representatives, each from deeply red districts, signed the document and sent it to the House Ethics Committee. A press release followed within the hour. It was measured, full of diplomatic phrasing like decorum and civility, but the undertone was unmistakable. They were coming for her. Crockett found out while reviewing policy notes in her office. Her chief of staff handed her the paper without a word. She scanned it, folded it, and set it aside. "Expected worse," she said. But the pressure didn't stop there. That evening, a segment on a major conservative talk show ran a story titled, "The Rise of Radical Disrespect in Congress." The host, known for his fiery style, played the clip of Crockett and Trump 3 times. Then he turned to the camera. "This isn't just about politics," he said. "It's about a growing lack of respect for authority, for leadership, for the office itself." The next morning, Crockett's office received a bomb threat. It was cleared within an hour, no device, no suspect, just a phone call with enough detail to spark fear and put her team on edge. Security tightened. Staff worked in pairs. Jasmine was advised to limit public appearances and stay off the Hill unless absolutely necessary, but she showed up anyway, wearing a plain black blazer and carrying the same worn leather tote she'd had since her law school days. She walked into a closed-house session and sat silently through 3 hours of debate on campaign finance reform. A few members glanced her way. Most didn't. Outside the chamber, Representative Alton Briggs, a longtime GOP heavyweight, caught her in the hallway. "You don't think that was a little much?" he asked, half smiling. Crockett looked at him. "Too much for who?" Briggs chuckled. "For the room." She shrugged. "Then maybe the room's gotten too comfortable." He didn't respond. Later that day, Crockett received a call from Congresswoman Farrah Dillon, a moderate Democrat from Oregon, who had stayed silent publicly since the incident. She didn't waste time with small talk. "They're trying to isolate you," she said. "Pressure's on leadership to get you to tone it down." "Leadership hasn't said anything to me," Jasmine replied. "They're not going to. They're hoping you take the hint." "I don't do hints." Farrah paused. "Then be careful. This place doesn't always punish the loudest. Sometimes it just erases them." That night, an op-ed ran in the Hill titled, "Jasmine Crockett, Courage or Chaos?" The writer praised her directness but warned she was playing a dangerous game in a delicate institution. It read like a warning dressed in compliments. Behind closed doors, some Democrats were growing nervous. A few aides even whispered that she should let the moment pass before it blew up in her face. But Jasmine had already made peace with the storm. What rattled her most wasn't the threats or the ethics complaint. It was the silence of some of her own party. That silence said more than the headlines. Still, the support outside those marble walls continued to grow. Former civil rights attorneys, labor organizers, and young congressional candidates sent her public letters of solidarity. Several state legislators in Ohio, Michigan, and Florida quoted her line, "The truth doesn't require your permission," in their own chambers. In one small but unforgettable moment, a group of black high school students in Tulsa wrote her name in chalk across their school's walkway, surrounded by messages like, "We see you, Sue," and "Say it louder." Crockett saw the photo online during a late-night scroll. For the first time in a week, her eyes welled. She didn't say anything about it the next day. She just kept going. But while she faced institutional pushback in D.C., one unexpected twist was brewing, a private conversation about to be leaked that would tilt the entire narrative again. Late Thursday night, just past 11 p.m. The story cracked wide open again, this time from inside the White House. It started with an anonymous post on a niche political forum. A user with a track record for credible leaks dropped a single sentence, "There's a recording of Trump venting about Crockett in private, and it's worse than what he said on camera." At first, no one took it seriously. These kinds of rumors pop up often. Most die in silence. But by the next morning, the audio was verified, authenticated, and aired, first on a progressive podcast, then spread like wildfire across mainstream platforms. The recording was from a private meeting 2 days after the roundtable. It captured Trump speaking with his senior aides and 2 political consultants. What made it damning wasn't just the tone, it was the content. "You let that woman talk to me like that on live TV?" Trump snapped in the recording, his voice unmistakably agitated. "Where was the prep? Where was the control? You people keep letting these nobodies make me look weak." There was a pause, then the part that sent newsrooms scrambling, "I don't care how smart she is. She's a loudmouth from Dallas who doesn't know her place. You think she scares me? Watch what I do to her career. That line, doesn't know her place, hit like a thunderclap. It was everything people had been tiptoeing around since the incident. The words were loaded, historically heavy, and unmistakably condescending. By noon, media outlets on both sides had picked it up. For some, it confirmed what they suspected all along, that the president wasn't angry because of Crockett's tone, but because she didn't cower. Others tried to defend the statement, saying it was taken out of context or just frustration behind closed doors. But the damage had already spread. CNN ran the leak on repeat. MSNBC brought on cultural historians to talk about the legacy of women being told to know their place. On The View, co-host Anna Pierce said, "It's not just disrespectful, it's targeted." He didn't say she was wrong. He said she was too bold. Crockett was in a car heading to Fort Worth when her press secretary handed her the phone. "It's real," he said. "The recording's legit." They confirmed the metadata. She didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds, just stared at the screen. The car was silent except for the soft buzz of traffic outside. Then she asked, "Has he responded?" "Not yet." She leaned back and let out a slow breath. "He will." And he did. Within hours, Trump posted a statement on Truth Social, calling the leak a violation of executive privacy and a desperate move by radical leftists trying to distract from their failures. He never denied the words. He simply dismissed their meaning. But that response didn't help him. It inflamed it. By Friday afternoon, protests had started outside the Capitol and across cities like Philadelphia, Austin, and St. Paul. Small groups holding handmade signs, "We know our place. It's in power, and truth needs no permission." Crockett was asked by nearly every major network for an interview. She declined most. When she finally agreed to appear on 60 Minutes, the country tuned in. Sitting across from veteran journalist Mari Reyes, Jasmine wore navy blue, no jewelry, no fuss. "Congresswoman," Mari began, "you've stayed mostly quiet since the leak. What was your reaction when you heard that line, 'She doesn't know her place'?" Crockett's answer was calm, direct. "My place is where my constituents put me, in Congress, at the table, speaking up when others won't." Reyes leaned forward. "And what would you say to the president if you could respond directly to that recording?" Another pause. "I'd say, if my voice bothers you that much, maybe it's time you ask yourself why." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't angry. But it resonated. Clips from the interview were shared millions of times across platforms. In barbershops, in classrooms, in corner stores. People repeated her words like a reminder. By the next morning, one thing had become clear: Trump had tried to shame her. Instead, he gave her a louder microphone. But the moment still wasn't over, because Jasmine was about to deliver a speech that would silence even her most persistent critics. The invitation came from the University of Minnesota to deliver the keynote address at their Civic Leadership Symposium. The event had been planned months in advance, but once the clip of Crockett confronting Trump went viral and the leaked recording hit the airwaves, students insisted she be the one to speak. The administration pushed back at first, too political, too risky. But the students didn't budge. So, just 1 week after the roundtable that changed everything, Jasmine Crockett walked onto a stage in front of 200 students, professors, and civic organizers at Northrop Auditorium in Minneapolis. Her name was introduced with thunderous applause, but she didn't ride the energy. She let the room settle. "I didn't come here tonight to talk about a moment," she began. "I came to talk about what happens after." The lights were low, the room still. Phones lit up across the rows, not for distractions, but to record. Some people think politics is about theater, sound bites, headlines. But in my district, politics is about broken sidewalks, food deserts, and how far someone has to walk to cast a vote. And when I spoke last week, I wasn't trying to go viral. I was trying to remind folks that ignoring real problems doesn't make them go away. She paused. The room was quiet, waiting. They told me I should have used a different tone. They said I was too direct, too confrontational. But let me ask you something, when is the right time to say what's true? When it's convenient? When it's safe? When it won't offend anyone who holds the power? A student in the front row nodded slowly, phone raised. Someone whispered, "Say that." Crockett continued, her voice steady but rising. I was taught to respect the office of the president. I still do. But respecting the office doesn't mean you pretend the person holding it is above criticism. That's not patriotism. That's fear dressed as loyalty. She took a breath, looked around the room. My job isn't to manage the feelings of powerful men. It's to represent people who've been told their entire lives that they're asking for too much just by asking to be seen. The crowd broke into applause, sustained, loud, but she didn't pause long. They say I don't know my place. Let me tell you exactly where my place is. My place is in Congress. My place is in rooms where decisions are made about people who've been ignored for too long. My place is wherever truth needs a voice. At that moment, the camera panned across the auditorium. Some students were crying, others held their phones with shaking hands, as if afraid to miss a single word. And to anyone watching, she said, looking straight into the lens, if you've ever been told to be quiet, to wait your turn, to know your place, this is your reminder, your voice matters. Your truth matters. And no one, not even a president, gets to tell you otherwise. The standing ovation didn't wait for the speech to end. It surged forward, filling the room with a roar of claps, cheers, and stomps on the floor. Afterward, social media once again lit up. But this time, it wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Dozens of journalists, professors, and former skeptics began calling the speech presidential. Even critics were forced to admit she had struck a chord. Congressman Reed Lister, a centrist known for his cautious words, said during a live broadcast, whether you agree with her or not, Crockett delivered one of the most powerful civic speeches in a decade. That's leadership. Backstage, Jasmine sat quietly, sipping from a bottle of water, finally breathing deeply for the first time in days. Her advisor leaned over and whispered, "That did it." She looked at him, calm. "That wasn't it," she said. "That's just the beginning." But for every beginning, there's always a test, and the next one would come fast, in the form of a challenge she didn't see coming. The test came on a Tuesday morning, quiet, calculated, and completely off the radar. A group of senior Democrats had scheduled a private meeting, requesting Crockett's presence. No press, no agenda, just a conversation. She walked in knowing exactly what that meant, not an ambush, but a warning. The room was small, stale coffee, folded arms, no smiles. Congressman Leonard Price, in his 5th term and known for being part of the old guard, cleared his throat. "Jasmine, let's talk real. This moment, it's getting big, and fast. Some of us are concerned it's shifting the spotlight in ways that could hurt the party." "That's not a reflection on you." "It is," she interrupted calmly. "It absolutely is." He hesitated. "We're asking you to think strategically. Maybe lay low for a few weeks. Let things cool off." She didn't raise her voice, just leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear, if the problem is that people heard me, then maybe we're in the wrong business." Congresswoman Sandoval, who had stayed silent until now, finally spoke up. "We're not saying you're wrong. We're saying the country isn't ready for this kind of pressure from one of our own." Crockett looked her in the eye. "Then maybe it's time the country gets ready." The silence that followed wasn't tense, it was full, heavy with realization. She stood, thanked them for the conversation, and walked out. Outside, she didn't smile. She didn't fume. She just pulled out her phone and opened the email her team had prepped the night before. A community town hall in St. Louis, real voters, real stories. That's where she was headed next. Within hours, clips from her university speech were still trending. This time, though, it wasn't influencers or activists sharing it, it was everyday people, single moms in Tennessee, grandparents in Kansas, a mechanic in Toledo who captioned it, "Never heard of her before. I'm listening now." Cable networks couldn't spin it. Politicians couldn't contain it. And Crockett? She didn't try to ride the wave. She stayed rooted. At the St. Louis Town Hall, packed into a high school gymnasium, a local pastor stood up and asked, "What do we do when the people in charge are more afraid of truth than lies?" Jasmine stepped up to the mic and answered without missing a beat, "You outlast them." That line made its way into articles, podcasts, and classroom chalkboards within days. By the end of the week, her team had to move their community Q&A online because the crowds were too large to safely manage in person. But Crockett didn't scale back. She started live streaming once a week, answering unscripted questions, listening to rural organizers, youth groups, and elders from forgotten corners of America. One night, after a long call with local officials in Baton Rouge about public transit cuts, she sat in her kitchen alone, tea steaming in front of her. Her mother called. "You good?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "Tired, but not finished." "Never." The next morning, Time magazine called her the reluctant voice of a political shift. And for once, the headline felt right. She hadn't chased the spotlight. It had found her, and she'd refused to look away from it. When asked by a journalist what the lesson of all this had been, she didn't talk about strategy or media or even Trump. She said one thing: don't ask for permission to do the job they sent you to do. And that's what it came down to. Crockett hadn't gone viral because she raised her voice. She'd gone viral because she stayed calm, told the truth, and didn't ask for room. She took it. For every voter who had felt ignored, for every community leader who had been told to tone it down, for every kid who watched a clip and thought, "Wait, we can talk like that," she gave something back, not a viral moment, but a mirror. And in that mirror, people saw not just her, but themselves. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt too small to speak up, remember this: truth doesn't ask for permission, and neither should you. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that matter. And if this one moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.